We begin tonight with Ian Lee in Minneapolis. Ian, what's going on?
Major, despite being this now the warmest part of the day, 0 degrees, it felt like negative 22 earlier. You still have hundreds of people coming out here to this ICE detention center protesting against their current operation. People are chanting, they're blowing whistles, they have blow horns. Whenever you have a vehicle leave this detention facility, you have people hissing and yelling at them. This has been a sight that we've seen over the past few days, this tension that still remains quite high as this operation continues.
I see bike racks behind you, Ian. Are those new, and are they sort of a crowd control device to keep the protesters from entering the street and thereby sort of antagonizing federal law enforcement?
Yeah, Major, that's a good eye because these barricades are relatively new. This ICE detention facility has been a flashpoint between protesters and federal agents. Before these barricades were put up, you would have protesters going into the streets. That would elicit a reaction from the federal officers who would come out, try to push them back at times. We've seen pepper spray, we've seen tear gas, all sorts of means to try to push them back onto the sidewalk. Now you have a pretty heavy sheriff's presence here. They have cars all up and down this road, and they have more of these barriers put in to kind of try to help keep the peace.
Ian, I also want to ask you about this. A 36-year-old man arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Minneapolis, we have learned, has died while in federal custody in Texas. What do we know about that?
Yeah, this is Victor Manuel Diaz. He was arrested earlier this month. He was taken to a detention facility in Texas Wednesday afternoon. He was found unresponsive in his cell. We are told that paramedics arrived. They tried to revive him, but he died. They are ruling this, DHS, a suicide, but an investigation is still underway. Diaz had crossed into the United States from Mexico in 2024, and he was a citizen of Nicaragua.
Ian, very quickly, are ICE immigration enforcement actions still occurring in Minneapolis as best you can tell?
Very much so. We see them coming in and out of this facility around the clock. So it makes you believe that they are still out there in the streets, going to places where they think someone could be here undocumented. And so this operation doesn't seem like it's letting up, at least anytime soon, Major.
Ian Lee, on the scene for us in Minneapolis. Thank you very much. I want to bring in our CBS News legal contributor, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, I'm always grateful to have you on the show. I want to ask you about the Insurrection Act. What are its underlying legal parameters? Is anything happening in Minneapolis based on American precedent worthy of its declaration?
Just a few light questions. First of all, I always love talking to you and about these really weighty legal issues because the Insurrection Act is really like pulling a ripcord for a very, very serious consequence here. So when it comes to the Insurrection Act, there are basically three different parts. The first part is a governor asks you for help. Obviously, that's not what's happening in Minnesota right now. The second part is that there's some sort of rebellion or some sort of insurrection where federal officers cannot carry out federal law. We might be looking at that second part. And then the third part was used during the civil rights era, about 1957 to 1968, where states were undermining people's constitutional rights. And so in order to carry out desegregation orders, presidents used the Insurrection Act to send in the military. Now, as you know, the Insurrection Act allows us to pause posse comitatus, meaning that what we would have is the military directly enforcing domestic law on domestic soil. And that obviously is a huge exception to our general understanding that the military can't do that.
Jessica, has it ever been the case with the invocation of the Insurrection Act that those who are protesting government action are portrayed or legally defined as insurrectionists?
So Not to my knowledge. When we think about peaceful protests, not to my knowledge. And you asked me about precedent here. The precedent is, I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, the early 1990s. The governor said we need help because of the riots in the early 1990s as a result of the Rodney King case. When it comes to other precedent, we just talked about it. It's where president says that states are not carrying out desegregation orders. And so you have to send in the military to carry out those particular orders and protect people's constitutional rights. I don't see any historic analog when we're thinking about people who are protesting, even when protests get out of order. We should remember, of course, that saying I'm going to invoke the Insurrection Act is not just one step, but maybe 5 steps past what we've previously seen, which is the president saying I'm going to federalize the National Guard.
Jessica, sometimes litigation in real time can shine a light on a pending issue. There was a decision on Friday, which a federal district judge, as I understand it, said some of the tactics used by ICE personnel have to be stopped against protesters because they were excessive. The Trump Justice Department has appealed that this afternoon. Would that in any way inform any legal clash that would come should the Insurrection Act be invoked?
So I think if the Insurrection Act is invoked, then we're under a completely different paradigm. And Major, you asked me about this before. I just want to make clear there is a question as to whether or not when a president says, I'm invoking the Insurrection Act, if that's even reviewable by federal courts, because you just asked me about a situation where a federal court said, you know what? When it comes to peaceful protesters, you can't use chemical agents. You can't use tear gas. Obviously, a federal judge is saying it, meaning a federal judge feels comfortable reviewing the actions of the federal government. But when it comes to the Insurrection Act, there are cases dating all the way back to 1805 that indicate that might be a question only for a president. And so that would put us, again, in a completely different legal framework if we were to use the Insurrection Act.
Completely different legal framework. Words to think about and ponder. Jessica Levinson, always with the answers. Appreciate it so very much.
Thank you.